Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PDAC 2022 virtual convention. My name is Manisha Basram, Policy Analyst of Indigenous and Regulatory Affairs at the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada. It's my pleasure to open today's Indigenous Affairs Program session, exploring the social impact of mineral development projects in Indigenous communities. The Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada is a proudly Canadian organization with our office based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. As we're online today, we respectfully acknowledge that in the Toronto area, we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, also known as the Huron, the Chippewa, the Anishinaabe peoples, and all of the Indigenous nations that have lived on these lands over the centuries. In 2021, PDAC set out to identify anticipated impacts and subsequent increased demands on social infrastructure within host communities that are proximal to mineral development projects in Canada. Using a gendered lens, the social impact study established a set of practical strategies mineral resource development companies can exercise to mitigate their social impacts on host Indigenous communities, as well as create opportunities for improving situations often found in remote Indigenous communities. So in addition to the timeliness and relevance of this research, our study aligns with the federal government's commitments to accelerate the work on the National Action Plan in response to the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, implement the Truth and Reconciliation's calls to action, and adopt Bill C-15 or UNDRIP, an act respecting the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Today's conversation will be hosted by Soup Strategies Inc. founder and CEO, Sabrina Diaz, as well as Associate Stakeholder Engagement, Norma Vasquez. Today, we are so pleased to be joined by Beverly Russell, Project Manager of the Gitanyow Education and Training Institute for the Gitanyow Hereditary Chiefs, as well as Elder Dorinda Sherry of the Gitanyow community. This was an honor, this conversation and this research, being able to hear the stories and the lived experiences of community members and really learn the importance of community engagement, but also specifically engaging with women to make sure that projects benefit the communities and create sustainable growth for all project partners. I'm so excited that you've all joined us here today. And with that, I'll pass it over to Sabrina.
So our project with PDAC this year executed over about 6 to 7 months. The purpose of it was to, what we say is to achieve a better understanding of the impacts of the social and cultural fabrics in Indigenous host communities. And we say they're already well known because there have been a lot of studies already done. There have been many social and environmental impact assessments. So generally we know what those impacts are, but we wanted to achieve a deeper understanding for the mission that Manisha just outlined. In addition to that, we wanted to understand the social infrastructure and how it can be built or improved and expanded to meet those needs of Indigenous host communities. So again, we wanted to do this through a gender-based approach. And essentially what that means is speaking with women in the local communities, understanding how impacts not just are felt generally, but how they are felt by women, how it impacts their daily lives, how they think, how they see the future, and particularly how those impacts can affect the relationship within families, particularly between the relations of men and women as the mine comes into construction and operation. So it was a 4-phase process. We did a very extensive literature review, which included academic papers, research that was commissioned by local NGOs. Our focus was on Canada, and that took about 4 to 5 weeks. Once we did that and we knew what we wanted to really focus on, we thought the best way to really pressure test this would to be look at a case study. So we looked at the Bruce Jack project, and actually Norma will talk a little bit more about that and the interviews around that. So we selected the Bruce Jack project in British Columbia and the communities around there, and we asked Manisha and Bruce Jack to help us identify potential participants for the interview process. We budgeted for 6 in our schedule. We could have done a lot more because it was fascinating and it was such a good learning process. So we completed the 6 interviews, and then we went into an analysis phase where Soup Strategies takes a very qualitative combined with a quantitative approach to the analysis to really understand the issues that emerged from the research, from the case study, and from the stories that we heard from these women. And then once that was done, we convened, and Norma and I and our team, and looked at the types of recommendations that would be suitable for the impacts that we understood to be.
Amasa, good day. My name is Beverly Russell. My traditional name is Simnam Smech. I belong to Wilpes Nikyep. It's our house group. I'm from the Wolf clan. And I was born and raised here in Gatineau, but my roots and traditional territories are located within the Hazel Kispiox area. I have worked with the Gatineau Hereditary Chiefs for 6.5 years as the project manager for the Gatineau Education and Training Institute. So I'm honored and blessed to live and work here on the traditional territories of the Gatineau Nation.
My name is Dorinda Sherry. Traditional name Moot, and born and raised in Gatineau, and also traditional territories are at the Hazelton and Kispiox area.
Thank you, Dorinda, and thank you very much, Beverly. Just to continue with this discussion, we would like you, if you could share, what were some of the positive aspects as well as the challenges that your community experienced since the Brewjack operation began in your territory?
Some of the positive changes that we have witnessed since the opening of the mine include various employment opportunities for both men and women here in the community. We've noticed that, through the secured full-time employment with the mine, it really opened up a lot of opportunities for families to provide for themselves, to provide different opportunities for their children. We see that the children are involved in sports and other activities. They're able to go out and go on trips with their families. And we've noticed, a lot of economic growth within the community. So a lot of revenue staying within the community and the surrounding area. Some of the challenges that we faced as a result of a lot of a boom in employment in our community was some things were unexpected. And the one that really stands out for us is we do have a volunteer fire department. And when a lot of the men were going away and working full time, that really left our community in a vulnerable state where we didn't have anybody filling those roles. And so a few years ago, there was a time where the volunteer fire department was all comprised of women, because women are the ones who are primarily left in the community. And so, we band together, we started practicing, and, we had to come together to fill that very important role to ensure the safety of our community. As a result of that, because, the regular fire department was comprised of men, we found ourselves lacking appropriate sizes for turnout gear. And, that was one thing that was really challenging for the community. Another thing that we noticed is because majority of our employees working at the mine are men, a lot of the women have been at home filling that childcare provider role within their family. And another thing that we've noticed is that we have definitely outgrown the capacity at our local daycare. And without having that vital infrastructure as well as that staff, it really limits the women in our community with participating in furthering their education, taking part in training, or even applying for employment themselves.
Thank you, Beverly. Besides the challenges, positive impacts and challenges that you already mentioned, in general, how do you think women in your community felt about or feels about the establishing of a mining operation in your area? In this case, with Brucejack, what has been your experience? And in general, what do you think would have been the experience of the women in your community?
For those that have applied and secured employment with Brucejack, I know that they've shared with us that it has been quite a positive experience for them. It's a really good work environment, and there are opportunities for growth and moving into those positions that require more responsibility. And for those that have chosen to stay home and fill that childcare role, some of the feedback that we got is on the positive side was that, you know, they do have those opportunities to go out and do activities with their children. But one of the negative impacts of that as well is the impact it has on the family as a whole. When employees are working on shift rotations, the parent who's going and working, you know, really does miss out on those, the growth of their children, the first steps, the first words, you know, all of those firsts. And, you know, it really does feel like such a sacrifice for both parents, you know, not having their spouse to help with the everyday things. And, you know, we've even noticed, you know, it's been challenging on the children as well, you know, having a parent who's there half time. And, you know, it's just, we definitely see the benefits. And I know that families are working towards, you know, finding that balance for themselves. But it does come with its challenges for sure.
Great. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. Would your grandmother would like to share something?
We usually have a discussion just before the interviews, but like Beverly said, it's the parents that go away to camps. For instance, with my little granddaughter, it's I find that they are closer to me than the mother, because I spent 2 weeks with her. She sleeps with me, and she's, you know, 2 weeks out of the month, and so I find they really rely on me than anything else after a while. And but like I am grateful for the mother to be working and you know, taking time, the 2 weeks in and 2 weeks out, and they really provide for their children after.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. Sabrina?
So just before we get into these specific findings and recommendations, some of the high level ones that we want to share and we think are really important for companies to be aware of to make their impact assessments more effective and inclusive is to take a gender sensitive approach to Indigenous engagement. So seeking out women in particular and elders was really important to really understanding how complex one identified social impact may be and the complexities that are direct and indirect to that. Engage with the community beyond the leadership of the Indigenous community. From most of the conversations that we had through this study, We found it was important that companies really go further than the leadership and talk to moms and dads and grandparents in particular, because there is a trickle-on effect when a mine comes into the community and impacts the entire family, multi-generational. And the third one is about relationship building. We call it stakeholder engagement and community relations, but it really is about building that connection. Your employees in the community relations team or the stakeholder engagement team, there'll be formal meetings that are often had, public forums, but the informal is what's really important. Anecdotally, we heard through interviews, just come and share a meal with us and get to know us. And I think that would go a long way with trust and credibility down the line, but it's really about getting to know the people and not just the community as one mass singular item, but the people within it. And then this is something I've always advocated since first entering mining 20 years ago, is taking a gender lens, looking at how impacts are felt by the women. That means speaking to women directly, and how those impacts affect the relationship dynamics between the family and between the husband and wife. As we heard, mostly the men are off at the mine, but you know, for the many years that I've worked at the mine sites, I didn't really hear too much from the men I worked with that they missed the first steps. But speaking with the women, it was the women at home in the communities that we spoke with, or the people that we spoke with the study, is that it's really important to understand gender impacts, take a gender lens-based approach to social impacts. So we might have had many findings and we categorized them. I'll just run through them because I really want to get back to the conversation with Beverly and Dorinda. Again, outreach to women specifically. What we do at Soup Strategies is we'll always advocate with our clients to have a women-only focus group, and just women of varying members of the community. Early, of course, engagement, but specifically engagement with the elders, and tailored programming of how we engage them, go to them, or provide transportation. Again, for the assessment phase or assessment studies, gender consideration, a socio-X situation study, and taking a human rights-based approach, because there's a lot of overlapping there, impact on quality of life, impact on quality of water, and so forth. Seek somebody local from the community to bring onto your team to really get an understanding of the community and what you should be doing, how you should be engaging. And then the resources or human resources. Oh, sorry, my cat's coming over. Contractor and employee accommodation. That has been a big discussion point through the interviews that we did for this project. And then implementing a hiring practice that educates potential employees and their wives or husbands and the children on what a rotational employment would look like and what that would feel like. And that speaks again to what Beverly mentioned earlier about, and Dorinda alluded to, where the employee is off to site for 2 weeks. That's a big impact on the whole family and the community. For example, with as Beverly talked about with the fire station. So having workshops ahead of time, and then they can decide, okay, I think I really do want a fly-in fly-out position or a rotation position, and will apply to the mine site before going through the process. So program design, this is where we felt we unearthed or found emerging some ideas and recommendations that could be really, really critical and kind of low-hanging fruit. If we can just go down to digital infrastructure, that is a huge barrier to families connecting, and in remote areas where the infrastructure is not there, but seeing those first steps through the Zoom or the webcam, it provides that family connection ongoing and time to do that. and even just for the community themselves outside of the mining operation, but elders and keeping connected with other people. The pandemic showed us that digital infrastructure was very important. Childcare, I think Norma and I could have put that down 3 times at least on this list. And this isn't the first time that we've heard childcare be an issue in other projects that we've worked on. And it's so critical if we do as an industry want to get more women into the sector, more Indigenous women into the sector, we need to consider appropriate childcare and access to it. Education and training specifically for women, health services, another area that social infrastructure is needed support with. In remote Indigenous communities or any remote community, but particularly the communities that we researched and spoke to community members with, food security. So often that drives up the price of food. So, and already impacting an already vulnerable situation. Beverly and Dorinda, if I could ask you guys to speak to some of those impacts that we found, and some of them came from the interviews. And yeah, do you have any reflections or comments?
Thank you so much for that, Sabrina. That as you are going over the recommendations, we definitely would wholeheartedly agree with them. I know that just due to the remoteness of our community, food security has been an ongoing issue, and the closest space where we are able to purchase food is an hour to an hour and a half away. And just that travel for medical services as well as specialist appointments and stuff like that has been an ongoing issue within our community, especially for people who may not have a vehicle or a mode of transportation. And the daycare for us, just thinking about all of the families who do have a spouse or a partner working at a mine, the childcare, lack of childcare services available here in the community has been a barrier to women participating in various programming, whether or not it's upgrading or going to post-secondary or taking part in trades training, anything like that. It has been quite a barrier because you don't have that infrastructure or that staff that you could turn to. You're forced to look at friends who may be available, family members, and like my grandma mentioned, that has been a role that she's taken on since my cousin and her granddaughter started working at the mine. And so you're kind of for the elders, you're kind of putting them in a situation where they're the only option, they're the only reliable source of childcare. And for my grandma, she retired years ago, and it was right after she retired where my cousin secured employment. And so for half of her month, every 2 weeks, she's filling that role. And so I think about the women and who may not have that source of childcare, it really limits their ability to further advance their own careers or even pursue careers. And so we definitely agree with the need for daycare.
Beverly and Dorinda, I was wondering if you both might comment on the recommendation of targeting women for education and training at the mine and designing accessible training programs for women who want to be employed by the mining sector from your community.
We would agree with that recommendation. I know that when it comes to training that we have delivered here in the community, a lot of women are starting to take up on the trades training as well as the light equipment and heavy equipment operator courses. And they're really eager. They're really eager to get their foot in the door. One of the barriers that they felt was, it is a predominantly male occupation. And so, you know, we do have some trailblazers who are wanting to get out there and get that experience and pursue careers in that area. For right now, it feels like they're just not really given the opportunity. And, you know, for various reasons, you know, they took part in training, but they don't quite have the hours. So seeking apprenticeship positions within the mine would help them a great deal. And yeah, we'd 100% support that recommendation.
I was wondering if you both might comment on the need for digital infrastructure and maybe the experience through the pandemic that really revealed how it is needed to stay connected, but how that might help with community cohesion and the, you know, maintaining the fabric of the community and the tightness of the community, how access to internet might do that.
My grandma and I both agree that that would be a really good benefit to the community. I know that when we were dealing with the beginning of the pandemic, modes of communication have been a barrier for members in our community. A lot of people do not have telephones or landline, and because we are limited with cell service here in Gatineau, we have relied quite heavily on social media as well as Zoom. And when it comes to the experience level, you know, our community is on various different levels. A lot of our elders weren't quite familiar with how to utilize, you know, emails and setting up those accounts, as well as how to log into Zoom. So, you know, getting that information and those teachings out to the community would really benefit. Thinking about people who are working up at the mine, you know, that was using Messenger and Zoom and other online platforms were a way for families to stay connected. And even though there were some barriers because of spotty service up at the mine, you know, it really made quite a difference for families having that daily check-in with their loved one, seeing how they're doing, letting them know how their children are doing, different activities happening within the community, and sharing information about important dates that are coming up. And culture plays such a big role within our community and the Gitxsan Nation that, you know, there are some instances where people are requested to come home. And, you know, without having that way of connecting with people, with the workers up at the mine, you know, the loved ones of our members, getting that information to them would be such a big barrier, a huge challenge to overcome. And so, you know, the experience through the pandemic and, you know, it really shed a light on how valuable these modes of communication are. And if mining companies were able to provide assistance with that, it would make such a big difference for everybody.
Thank you. You mentioned something that makes me think of another question I'd like to ask of, you know, the culture of your community, and there's needs, and an employee will need to come back at certain times. And sometimes a company, mining or otherwise, might not know what those cultural needs are. What can you say about an engagement, the engagement process? You know, like what Norma and I did for this PDAC project was to seek out women and to speak with them about their experiences. What ideas or things would you like to see from a mining company of how to be engaged, how to be asked the questions, so that they can be sure, or you can be sure, that they have all of the knowledge that they need about the culture, about the, you know, the events in the calendar, the family traditions, things like that, so that they can accommodate and be culturally inclusive when they develop employment programs.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing that would be really beneficial is mining companies taking an interest in the history and culture of the communities surrounding the mine. And for us, when I'm thinking of different leaves that employees may be requesting, are to fulfill cultural duties. So within our culture, we're matrilineal. We follow our mother's line. So, you know, my grandmother is the matriarch of our community, or of our house group, of our family. And my mother would follow behind her, and I would follow my mother. And so would the generations following us. And one of the important roles that our father clan has, our father clan is belonging to a different clan than us. My father clan is Grouse clan, and they originate from Kitzbühel. And so the role of the father clan in our culture is to be there to help and support and be called on whenever there's a loss in the community. So if, you know, for example, if, you know, something were to happen to me or my siblings, it would be my father's side of the family who would be called on as workers to fulfill cultural obligations, responsibilities that they'd have for the full duration for all of the activities that'll take place, right from bringing our loved one home, the memorial or celebration of life, as well as the funeral and the settlement feast. So when you're a father clan, those come with a lot of responsibilities. And, you know, for employees that would be working with the mine, when you're called upon, you know, you're kind of expected to be there. You know, it's not something that you can decline because those responsibilities are placed on you right from birth. And so, you know, from the mine's perspective, if they have that understanding and if they're willing to work with the nations to grant those leaves, because they're, you know, sometimes you're not a direct relative of the person who's passed. And so getting that bereavement leave could be really tricky, but you do have those cultural responsibilities to fulfill.
I wouldn't mind asking you both, Beverly and Dorinda, what are questions that you would have liked to have been asked, or if a new mine was coming to the region and having another impact on the community, what would you like them to ask you about, you know, how they go about developing their project?
Some things that we were thinking about were how would the employee policies reflect, you know, kind of the needs of the community, the different kinds of leaves, the different kinds of support services offered to families, as well as the community. If there were any needs within the community, whether it be infrastructure or program funding, you know, what would that kind of look like, and what kind of support are they able to offer? I know that with the mine that we're working with, they're really great at providing that support. But for those, that I just keep bringing up the fire hall and the daycare, because those are still issues that we're dealing with today. You know, what kind of support would be offered there, because of, you know, how that came about was the increase in employment in our community. So it's something that we haven't had a chance to bring forward. And, you know, if it were something that we were able to foresee, then, you know, it would be nice to know what kind of support would be offered to the community.
Thank you. I think I have a last question, but Norma, do you have anything you want to ask?
Thank you, Sabrina. You know, more than asking, that's why I said at the beginning that this is the most interesting part of all this process, and just to listening to Beverly and Dorinda sharing all that knowledge, I think it's so valuable. My question was, what would you like to tell a mining company in terms of the value of engaging with women in your community?
What we would share with the mining companies is that, you know, women make up the fabric of the community. You know, they're such a vital source of life and strength. they are the ones who are taking the lead in a lot of initiatives in the community. Just thinking about the staff within our community organizations, probably 90% are women, and we are the women are the matriarchs of our house groups, and they offer that support and guidance to their members. And without having their feedback, I feel like you're missing out on a really great opportunity to learn about the different strengths and challenges that can be shared through that engagement.
Thanks, Norma. Good question. Last question for Dorinda and Beverly, and it's something we always like to ask and close with, is what are your hopes for the future? How do you see the future of your community, for your granddaughter and your great granddaughter and your grandchildren?
The way I look at it right now, it's the upcoming generation. It's the education is so important for them, and to get into the workforce and the mining and different work around our area. Sometimes it's really scarce, it's like Beverly said, 90% of the women are working in our community, and the men are out, like at Bruce Jack, 2 weeks in, 2 weeks out. Whereas the women with the families don't get that privilege to do that. Not very many can do that because of their family. So I'm really supporting the education, the training, so we have a lot of little young generations coming behind us, and hoping that they would graduate and everything to go to university to make a better life for them. Because I know that education is so important for
one thing that what I envision for our community is, a lot of happy, smiling faces, a lot of support for the families, a lot of support for women who are here in the community, filling those vital roles. We'd like to see, our children having a brighter future, through education and training, through different opportunities for travel. What we'd really like to see is seeing more women filling in and securing those roles that are predominantly occupied by men. And we like to see some positive changes and support for our membership to continue on with learning their culture, practicing their culture, and having that opportunity to be home and fulfilling their cultural responsibilities.
Dorinda and Beverly, thank you so much. Thank you for your time months ago when Norma and I sat with you over Zoom and chatted, and thank you for participating today. It's our privilege to listen and to have this conversation. Norma, closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Beverly and Dorinda. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. For us, it's been a wonderful experience, but also I think it's a very, very valuable information for mining companies that are hosted by your community or that are planning to be in the area. So thanks again for your time, for your sharing, for giving us the privilege of listening to you and learning from you.
On behalf of my grandma and I, we really would like to extend our thanks and appreciation for being invited to participate in this event. And, it's been really great knowing that, there are people out there listening and taking our recommendations into consideration. So thank you so much.
The honor was ours. Thank you.